Okay, you're on.
Greetings, all of you in the land of the internet, as well as our group here tonight at Assemblies of the Freedom, Assemblies of the Father's Love. I had everything all ready. I had the rewards ready. It was already done. It's on rbscott.com/blog. It's called Rewards. Is reward a bad word? And that was all ready. But then yesterday I got into preparing some of the new biblical encyclopedia of understanding, Bible understanding, and it's going to be 2,000 pages, five volumes in all, and we're finished just to number 3 now. Still have 4 and 5 to go, but I was just absolutely enthralled with the teaching I heard years ago, and some of you have heard it. Anybody heard the Nephilim series of teaching? Yes, there are a few here. Gerald said no. Gerald, our apostle, gave it, and I think he does remember it. Anyway, we thank God that he downloads things to Gerald. Sometimes he downloads it and then he gives it right then, but then afterwards he doesn't remember all the details, but it's always good. I think you can agree that it's always good, and we are blessed here to have this understanding. So I changed it yesterday and went to a message from what Gerald gave here in Nephilim that replies to this time that we're in right now, which is the time coming up to Passover and unleavened bread. So I know in the past we've had so many great revelations, and yet how many people were there? You know, we've been here for 18 years in all. There's some of our members who were not here back years ago when we had these great teachings. We still have great teachings, but we've missed some of them, and some may have forgotten what was said. So I want to remind us of what we have, the blessing that we've had. How many here have been helped by the ability God has given to our apostle to hear from God? Thank you. A number of you have, and I have. In fact, it's not about worshiping a man. We worship Jesus. However, I have, in personally speaking, this has sometimes saved my life several times, what he's heard from God. And I have never heard anyone to hear that well from God. We're learning always to hear more and more from God. But it is a blessing we have in this assembly to have that help, for sure. We're thankful that Gerald can share this gift with us and help us. Now, we're going to understand here that we are in a section where, in a country area now in Millen, Alberta, where we have very, very low upload speeds. So I do ask your forgiveness, but we're going to have to not do a whole teaching all at once, but stop it about every 10 minutes. So my helper here is going to be able to tell me at 9:30, not 9:30 at night, but 9:30 where we're getting close to 10, and we'll divide it up into several teachings that we can hopefully upload from my country area. This is going to be part 1, and I do prepare you, if you're in internet land, you may be shocked, because a lot of people say, oh, well, giants, that's just a conspiracy theory. Well, no, it's not a conspiracy theory. It's a truth that very few people are aware of. The giants were there before the flood, after the flood. You ask the Smithsonian Institute, they know. They have giant skeletons. They know there were giants on this earth, and the Bible does say that giants are coming back. We thank God that the believers will not be there to have to face them, but they're going to come back quite very soon now. So this may shock you if you're in internet and watching, and it may shock you if you're here. But we're going to go into, first of all, Genesis 17 and especially chapter 18, because chapter 18 talks about Abraham being visited by Jesus. Imagine that. And Genesis 17 starts with the verse 9 to 12, starts with the circumcision covenant. Now, this is a very painful thing, but it is a covenant God made with his people to have to be circumcised. Now, I was circumcised at an young age. My son Paul, we found a Jewish doctor who would do it back in Quebec City in 1983. And after 8 days, on the Sabbath day, we had him circumcised. I remember very distinctly how he cried out. It was painful. It didn't last very long, but it was painful. And it is a painful thing. But the question is, why the 8th day? Why the 8th day? Well, this is very important, because the 8, you may remember that the star of the mark of Cain was an 8-sided star. And this represented, another surprising thing if you're a Sunday keeper, it represents the 8th day. You know, Cain rebelled against God, and God said, you're not going to keep my Sabbath day. You're going to have to keep the 8th day. It was a punishment. You're going to keep this Sunday because it's a punishment. You can't have the blessing of receiving my word on my day. And so that's what happened. And any man at that time who was unwilling to cancel out the mark of Cain could not be part of God's people. Why? Because he was seen to be a giant worshiper, a worshiper of the Nephilim, which is the plural for giants in Hebrew. And now we come to Genesis 18, fascinating, in the plains of Mamre. You've got, it says the Eternal appeared to Abraham. Now, who was the Eternal? Well, the Bible says that in the New Testament, you've never seen the Father. You've never seen him at all. It had to be Jesus, who came as Melchizedek, high priest. And he came before Abraham in Genesis 18, like he had come in chapter 14 already with wine to do communion, because every time there was a communion ceremony, it was a special covenant meal they had with foot washing this time because it was Passover. Now, it's been revealed to Gerald that this was the Passover. So in Genesis 18, Abraham kneeled before Jesus and the two angels, and verse 4 and 5 offered to wash their feet, just like we do at Passover, and offer them meat and unleavened bread. Now, he did this in faith. He wasn't aware really of what he was doing, but he knew he had to do it, and he would understand later why he was doing this. And God would explain exactly why he did this. Here was a foot-washing covenant. You know, he's the only man ever in history to wash Jesus' feet. A woman did later when he was here as in the flesh, but he was the only man ever to wash the feet of Jesus. What a blessing. Now, we must understand something that happened with these giants. You see, first of all, in the Bible, Cain, we know, killed Abel. But did you know that not only did Cain kill and murder his brother, he homosexually raped him before he did. And this, with the bloodshed and the whole thing, polluted the land. And that's allowed the giants to begin to come before the flood. And then after the flood, you may ask, well, what happened after the flood? How could the giants come back after the flood? Because the Bible says they did. Well, you know that Noah was a righteous man. But you also know, and it's a little confusing because it was Canaan, his son, who was cursed because Canaan led Ham, his father, into this perversion. Ham is the one who raped Abraham, not Abraham, but Noah, a righteous man. And this opened the door for the Nephilim to come back after the flood and to give lots of problems, a lot of sexual problems like we see today. It was a sexual assault on a righteous man. Now, Abraham knew the dust of the land contained sin and had been cursed. Jesus was showing him that he could come against the defective genes of the giants. The unleavened bread he offered Jesus was the bread of life, lechaim in Hebrew. This was to bring back all the areas of life that Abraham and Sarah were dead in, to bring them back to life, even the ability to have children. So it was a covenant that he made with God that day with Jesus, and therefore the angels did offer the wine, and Abraham offered the hospitality, the unleavened bread, and it became a foot-washing covenant Passover ceremony. Jesus was in the process of deciding, what do I do with Sodom and Gomorrah? This is awful, and the sin is so great and all that. But he knew that Abraham, in verse 19 of chapter 18, was a godly man. He would direct his family in righteousness. And verse 20 says, the outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin so grievous. They made up new ways of sinning. And I'll end with this on this part. Just like today, we see all kinds of new ways. Do you know that man has an imagination sometimes greater than the evil Satan, who does think of a lot of bad things to do? But here was mankind doing it. We'll stop there and go into part 2 in a minute.